So good morning, Ms. Hilscher. Okay, so last time that we had our coaching conversation, we focused our conversation on being able to ensure that we were framing the lesson more effectively. And I noticed how you were able to implement that objective and I'm on a mission to statement. So what made that successful? What was the impact on your exit tickets?
Students have a preview of what they're expecting to solve for their exit tickets. They're kind of given some background information so they can prepare themselves to master their exit tickets.
Awesome. So today I do want to dive into how to use CFUs or check for understandings to ensure students are interacting and learning the material. So I want to get your perspective on it. And in your perspective, what are the key points of a successful CFU? So what does it sound like? What does it feel like when students answer effectively a CFU?
Students will be able to either, repeat back to me or drop it in the chat exactly how I projected it to them or taught it to them. So if they can tell me word for word or in their own words and it basically wraps the same concept, that shows that they understood the content or concept taught to them.
Now, are we talking about like procedural CFUs or are we talking about like extension of knowledge CFUs?
For more so, it would be probably procedural. That's what I see myself doing a lot more in lessons is procedural. So if they are able to, tell me how each step goes to solve for the TEK or the standard that we're working on, they would show that they understand how to solve it and receive mastery.
So awesome. And I guess my next question would then be, why do you think that we do CFUs? Like, what is the perceived purpose of a CFU?
For CFUs, the purpose of it is to make sure that students know exactly what I'm expecting so they can solve it. So when they see it on their unit exams or they see it on the STAR, they know exact steps to walk themselves through it and solve it so they are able to get the correct answer, hopefully almost every time.
Perfect. So what I want you to do is I want you to think back to the PD session on the lesson cycle from BOY. What were the key requirements for students to be able to show mastery in their exit tickets?
Okay. So if I am able to effectively communicate to students my key points, so with my do and my knows through my lesson planning, students will be able to show mastery effectively in their exit tickets. So my key points have got to be mastered through me, teaching it to them, and then they can start applying that to their exit tickets.
Okay, so then I guess my question would then be, how can we use your key points, right? You talked about how you were able to how you have to master your key points, how you have to be able to identify them when you unpack the lesson. So then my next question would then be, how can you convert those into effective CFUs?
So I think the part that I lack is actually listing step by step on what I'm doing to solve for each example. And I think if I start doing that, because my steps are my key points, so if I start listing them out for the kids piece by piece, they'll able to stay more in tune and follow along more in my examples that I model for them.
Well, I want to start off by saying thank you for being honest and just being self-aware of where your opportunity is to grow. So we're going to watch a small little video that will show us the implementation of CFUs in effective framework. So now after watching the video, what actions did you see the teacher take to use CFUs to help students interact with the material and help students master the concepts?
So after each small concept was introduced, a check for understanding was implied or implemented. I feel for myself, I know I do not do that. I actually go through maybe 1 to 2 examples and then do a CFU. So after one big key point or one big material that I want them or concept that I want them to register and engrave in their minds, I need to do a CFU immediately so they know and they can understand for the next step.
Okay, and so I guess my next question would then be, is so you kind of have that self-awareness of you kind of rush through the content, right? Like you have so much to teach, you want to teach it all, and so you go like boom, 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 like super fast. And in the video, we see a teacher taking like one concept, breaking it down, one concept, breaking it down through CFUs. So what was the impact on students that you observed with this type of CFU usage?
They were able to grasp a lot more information, so they can start applying it to greater concepts. So something more rigorous. If the teacher wanted to implement something a little bit more difficult, the students would be able to start attempting that and maybe just have a little bit guided practice to solve the rest of it on their own.
Okay, so then between what you saw today and how you've been teaching this past couple of weeks, what do you see the gap between the video and your classroom? What is missing? And you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but what do you feel is truly missing for you to be able to master the CFU implementation?
So I think when I introduce new material, I need to CFU a lot more there versus waiting until my guided practice. I need to make sure that the students are understanding the key points and the procedures to solve right in the beginning. So I'm going to definitely implement in my introduction to new material more CFUs versus waiting until later in my lesson.
Okay. So what challenges have you had in effectively implementing the CFUs?
What challenges have I had what was it?
In implementing the CFUs. So teaching virtually is very different, yes. Right?
Yes.
So how I've seen you try to put in CFUs into your lesson, but what challenges have you encountered?
So I definitely use the chat. I use the students coming off mic. I also use the response box on Pear Deck. I think it's just getting all of student engagement because they're sitting behind a computer. It's super difficult for me to know if they're actually engaged and wanting and taking their notes and putting everything on a piece of paper in the notebook. I can say, camera's on, but I've got to kind of sometimes pick my battles. And if I'm taking a lot of time out of my lesson to get all the kids' cameras on, that's taken away from time of me modeling to them. So I think, having students coming off mic, I cold call, I keep a list here of students that respond and don't respond. I do the drop it in the chat box for those that maybe, I don't want to come off mic. I don't want to do that, so they drop it in the chat box, and then I can also have them, message me privately on Teams, and then the Pear Deck response. If I can just, get a little bit more engagement from the students, I know that I can move on. But not every class is like that. It's I can get 2 or 3 days of that, and then the other days are not like that.
And do you feel like if you were able to chunk the CFUs per concept the way we saw in the video, do you feel like that would increase the engagement that you're not getting from the kiddos?
It's definitely something that, of course, I know has data and has proven to be useful. So I think that I'm gonna, definitely I can start there, chunking it and doing it more often so the kids know, oh, Miss Hilscher's about to ask me a question, I need to be prepared.
Okay, so based on what we discussed today, what do you think your action steps should be moving forward?
Moving forward, I'm definitely going to use a lot more CFUs in the beginning of my lesson. So students are engaged and they know the concepts that I'm looking for to basically assist and make sure that they show mastery when getting to their exit ticket at the end of the lesson. So definitely more in the beginning of my lesson and then also in my guided practice.
Okay, so and I do want to reinforce that because you said it perfectly. So your next steps are to monitor learning through CFUs when introducing new material and through guided practice. I've already input this action step into your Teach Boost alongside with some how action steps. So the next question, now that we identified what we need to do, is really thinking about how we're going to get this done. So what I've listed here for you is identify key points within your lesson to convert them to CFUs, which we've already talked about in terms of how we can use that to leverage high engagement. And then identify where in the lesson they need to be asked. So once we have those key points, where do we need to ask them? How are we going to chunk it like we saw it on the video? Then third, implement the actual CFU. And lastly, respond to the CFU with follow-up questions. So based on how students answer the CFU, maybe you need to ask further questions to clarify or ask further questions to extend their learning. So in your words, what is your what your what and your how next steps? And what does it look like for you as you think about your classroom?
So my what would be basically what I just said with the introduction to new material. So what am I going to do? I'm going to implement more during my introduction to new material. How? I'm going to basically piece it. So when I'm introducing a key point, I'm going to follow up with a CFU. I'm going to introduce another key point, follow up with a CFU, and keep going until the kids are showing me that I can move on to my guided practice and modeling for them.
So let's go ahead and think about your lesson for tomorrow and how could you implement this in your introduction to new material and your guided practice.
So for the introduction to new material, I will use more CFUs to make sure students are grasping the concept. For instance, for tomorrow's lesson, I'm going to be spiraling back about functions. So students will have the 4 relations or representations of a function. Some CFUs I could use on it is, for instance, when they have a graph, I could implement questions such as, how are you going to test for a function on a graph? Students will respond vertical line test. And then I will have a student who can model it on my screen as well for those that maybe have a misunderstanding of the vertical line test.
So go ahead and take 5 minutes and write your script as some of the questions that you could ask in your introduction to new material and your guided practice so we can kind of see how those questions roll out. Okay, so now that you have your questions, let's hear some of the questions that you're going to ask the kiddos.
Sure. So when students have the graph, how we're going to test a function on a graph, a vertical line test. For a table, how are we going to test for a function on a table? We're going to see if the x value repeats. Students will be asked what is the x. They should give me other answers such as input or independent variable.
So what would those questions look like? Like, let's go back to the first one. Mm-hmm. What would that question look like if I was a student?
So if you were a student and you were looking at the graph to see if it's a function, I would say, for instance, Seth, is this a function or not a function? Well, Seth would say he's not sure. How can we test if a graph is a function? We're going to use the vertical line test. Okay, if you use the vertical line test, what has to happen on my vertical line in order for the graph to be a function or not a function? The student should respond if there's 2 or more spots where it intersects on the vertical line, the graph would not be a function. If there's only 1 intersection on the vertical line, the graph would be a function.
Okay, awesome. Now let's pretend though, based on this initial plan that you have, what if a student does not get it? So what if they're unable to answer the CFU? What support systems can you implement to be able to ensure that the student is able to get to the answer?
So if I have students who are not understanding the CFU, Pear Deck has the option for me to share responses from a student. I can definitely show my screen of a student who's modeling an exemplar response for those that are struggling to answer the CFU so that they can see it visually and they can also hear me discussing out as the student is modeling on my side.
Okay, awesome. So I'm really excited to see the lesson tomorrow. But how would you say that kind of scripting out your questions, practicing out your questions, seeing the video that we saw, how do you think this helps you with your action step?
I feel it allows me to be a lot more prepared for my lessons. That way I know what I'm going to drill into my lesson to make sure students are grasping the concepts. I also try to make sure that the CFUs I ask can definitely assist them on their unit exams too. I think that's super important. I try to take the key points that I do when I unpack the assessment, and I try to drill those CFUs in my lessons.
Awesome. So then Mr. Hernandez, Dr. Cantu, and I will be there tomorrow to see your lesson and to see your implementation of the CFUs. And then we'll go ahead and debrief after. Okay?
Okay.